Hey everybody, welcome. Sorry for, well, I was about to say sorry for a few delays getting started tonight, but that is nothing compared to the delays and problems we've had getting this class scheduled in the first place. So I apologize for that even more. Thanks for being able to join me on comparatively short notice, and it's sort of especially disappointing to me that this was the class that kept getting delayed, because I've been really looking forward to this class, talking about Faramir. So let's not delay any further and get straight to Faramir. Now, I wanted to, having said that, do a couple brief things first. First of all, I do want to finish up the passages that we didn't get to last time, at the end of looking at Frodo and Gollum and looking at Frodo's choices there in the first few chapters. However, one brief thing I wanted to do, actually, just to pick up on where we ended last time, which was looking at Gollum and Smeagol. And one of the things that I think is really striking when you look really carefully at that passage, you can see the element that Tolkien has really added since The Hobbit, which is giving Gollum a genuinely divided personality. We can see the remnants of thinking of the phrase that he uses there, the remnants of old truth and sincerity. There is a good Gollum that is still there, and this was introduced way back in Chapter 2, back in the Shadows of the Past by Gandalf, when Gandalf says that there is no hope that Gollum can be cured, and that's not a really wonderful commendation, of course, on Gandalf's part, but it is why he explains one of the reasons why he did not let the elves execute Gollum, because he believes there is a chance, even if it's small, that Gollum could be redeemed. That was less obvious in Gollum as we saw him in The Hobbit. I should specify, of course, Gollum as we saw in the revised Hobbit. Gollum as we met him, or as some few people met him, back in 1937 in the first edition Hobbit, before Tolkien changed Gollum around and revised that chapter significantly in order to make it compatible with the status of the ring as the Ring of Power. The original Gollum, of course, was he ate hobbits, but wanted to eat Bilbo. But apart from that, was really a splendid guy generally, and did fine. That was less so. He became more miserable, but also more wicked. And there were very few glimpses, I think. There are very few glimpses in the published Hobbit that most of us know that really suggest that Gollum is redeemable, that there's good lurking still in Gollum. He's miserable. But yes, Kay says his sweetheart with a touch of cannibalism. Exactly, yes. But anyway, I do think that we can see Tolkien has sort of shifted that again as we come into The Lord of the Rings, and that now we have taken Gollum's character one step further, and with the emphasis, which is clearly building up to the parallel that we can see, the likeness, the connection that Frodo feels for Gollum. I mean, there is a way in which, those moments where Sam is looking and he sees. I didn't do this passage though. It was one of the ones I was. It's the last scene that I cut from our class last time. Apparently not. I didn't cut enough. But anyway, the last one that I cut was that scene when Sam kind of sees them with other eyes, and he sees Frodo standing there like a stern lord, and at his feet a groveling dog. That sort of glimpse of Frodo and Gollum as they are on the other side, but yet at the same time, though there's this great distance between them and their stature, there's also a likeness between them, and they can sort of see into each other in ways that other people can't. There's a way, of course, in which we're getting a before and after picture with Frodo and Gollum, and that seems to be something that Tolkien's really emphasizing in The Lord of the Rings, which again certainly wasn't really there in The Hobbit. But this is all sort of backwards commentary on the Slinker and Stinker conversation that we were looking at the end of class last time, because I wanted to look, just glance on the subject of Gollum at Faramir's diagnosis, because I think this is an important thing to keep in mind, and we can sort of overlook it. "Frodo, I think you do very unwisely in this," said Faramir, that is, following Gollum to Cirith Ungol. "I do not think you should go with this creature. It is wicked." "No, not altogether wicked," said Frodo. "Not wholly, perhaps," said Faramir, "but malice eats it like a canker, and the evil is growing. He will lead you to no good." And I think that this is something that is really important to keep in mind. And this, of course, comes at the very end of the Faramir section here in the Two Towers, and we have really no reason. We have really no reason to suspect that Faramir is incorrect in his diagnosis. His insight has been dependable thus far. So I am inclined to take Faramir's assessment as something pretty close to fact here. About Gollum and the state of Gollum's heart. Faramir concedes, yes, I can see that Gollum isn't wholly wicked. He is not 100% wicked. Frodo wants to emphasize that. It is wicked, he says. And Frodo's like, no. And Faramir says, okay, whatever. But what Faramir emphasizes, which is the thing I think that we can so often forget, Faramir says, he's not entirely wicked, but that's the direction the arrow is pointing right now, my friend, and don't kid yourself, right? Gollum is not, according to Faramir, in the process of recovery. And this, I think, is something that is a mistake that we can sort of make. If we can kind of come beside Frodo here and say, okay, no, I can still see some Gollum. If the Smeagol voice in that debate, really kind of tugs at you, and it's like, oh, see, they're still good in Gollum. We can, it'll be okay. Maybe he is. We know he's going to fall. He's going to fall off the cliff. I meant that metaphorically, not literally. But anyway, we know he's going to, he's going to take a wrong turn before too long, before the end of this book. But at the very least, there is this temptation to say, well, okay, no, he is getting better, right? He's taken the oath to Frodo, and he's trying to keep it, and he's getting better, and it's not going to work, but he's. Faramir says no. Malice is eating it like a canker, and the evil is growing. There is good in Gollum. He is not wholly wicked, but he's not getting better. He's getting worse. And what is getting worse is that the malice that eats it like a canker. The malice, that's the Gollum voice. That's the green glint in his eyes. That's the stinker. And stinker Stinker is getting stronger, not weaker. This is something that they do differently, of course, in the film, and it's really one of the most dramatic differences. So I think the most dramatic difference in the depiction of Gollum. The way that they have Gollum actually getting better, and then they have his return back into his evil ways following the for him in the film's very unfortunate encounter with the Rangers of Ithilien. That becomes this sort of moment of it's tragedy in the film, right? They're misunderstanding him. They're not evilly intentioned, but they do wrong, and it sort of falls apart. It feels like a tragedy in the film. Very interesting the way that they did that, I think. And I think it works really well in the film. I quite like the Gollum story as it's depicted in the film. I think it's one of the most interestingly constructed character arcs in the whole Lord of the Rings film trilogy. But it's not the same as in the book. And I just think it's important for us to notice this. We will get to the potential opportunity for redemption, which does happen in the book. But that's not the direction that he's moving in. He's not getting better and better. He is getting worse and worse because of that malice. He hates Frodo. Yes, we hate every Baggins, right? That malice which speaks out, and as Sam notices, it's not the good Gollum, it's not the Smeagol that has the final word, right? It's the bad Gollum. It's this malicious Gollum that has the final word in that debate. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just scanning through comments now. Let's see. Diego points out that he says it's interesting. I haven't thought about it in these terms, Diego. Diego says we should remember that oaths in Tolkien are an entity in and of themselves. Gollum might keep the oath, gritting his teeth and wanting to kill the hobbits. The fact that he doesn't go through with his oath, it's the fact that he doesn't go through with it is his oath, not the goodness underneath. There is power in that, Diego, and I agree with you. I'm not sure I'd go quite so far as to say that the oaths are an entity in themselves. They're certainly a major factor in themselves, and they do have power. The oath binds Gollum. He cannot... he is bound. He is constrained. And I do think, Diego, that that's a really important thing for us to remember. Kay was pointing out as a side note that she noted the pale light descriptive phrase describing Boromir's funeral boat in Faramir's eerie dream or vision. It's certainly not a universally evil description. It comes up a lot in different ways. It's why I don't know how, because of the complexity of that, the different... the kind of elasticity of that phrase in Tolkien's prose, I'm never quite sure how to peg it when it's used to describe Gollum's eyes. Diego, I agree. It's not just his word, like his promise, with which the there seems to be some scorn towards that promise that Gollum, the stinker Gollum, speaks. Calls it a silly promise, but at the same time doesn't just suggest breaking it, rather suggests ways around it. Christina asks, could it be that Gollum is still redeemable at this point because he has not yet made the definitive choice to betray Frodo? Perhaps it's the decisive choice that makes the difference. Christina, I agree that sort of the point of no return comes later. But I do, so I agree, he is still, the potential is still there. He still has the ability to turn back and choose. But in the end, there's going to come a point past which he does not seem to have that choice. And that brings me to Trish's point, or her question. It talks about Tolkien writes in letters in later years about Gollum's potential redemption. Do you think that Tolkien backed off on Gollum's full evilness after the fact? I don't think so, Trish. I don't see that as a backing off necessarily. One of the things, though, notice how casually, Trish, you are luring me into getting off topic and starting to talk about the Return of the King when we are so not there. But nevertheless, I'll do it anyway because I'm a sucker. But Tolkien emphasizes with both Frodo and Gollum that there are two different things at work. There's their own wills, and there is their strength. Frodo's will holds out as long as he possibly can, but there is a point after which he can't anymore. Frodo eventually fails, and this is something that bothered a lot of people when the book first came out and Tolkien wrote about this. Gollum ultimately, he reaches the point where he can't, I think, choose. By the time we get towards the Cracks of Doom, Gollum can't choose at that point. Gollum is unredeemable at that point. But it's because he's already past that point. He's already chosen. And he is now reaping the fruits of the choice that he already made. It's like when you are already careening down the slope, it's too late to stop. Stopping was a while back. And Tolkien does seem to sort of suggest that there are those two things involved. You do, in order for them to turn back, you've got to have the will, but it's not just as easy as choosing, right? At that point, Gollum is completely overwhelmed. Anyway, anyhow, so but I'm not going to get into that too much further. Let's wait until we get there. At the very least, we need to wait until we get to Gollum's choice. We'll get to that next week, of course, where I think is really the final pivotal moment for Gollum. But anyway, I did want to skip over this passage entirely because I'm not going to be talking about Gollum much for the rest of this class. So I did want to at least hit that. But let's go back now to Frodo and Frodo's choosing, and I'm going to try to be. I will make an attempt to be a little bit more efficient here. This is Frodo's sort of threat and prophecy against Gollum. One of the passages which retroactively is just awesome. I think this is one of the passages that is so cool on a second reading of the book. You read it. When you're reading the Lord of the Rings for the first time, you might not really note or pay attention to this entire passage. When you read it a second time, that's when you're like, "Wow, that's really cool." Anyway, he's just said that to beware to Smeagol that he's in danger. "I did not mean the danger that we all share," said Frodo. "I mean a danger to yourself alone. You swore a promise by what you call the precious. Remember that. It will hold you to it, but it will seek a way to twist it to your undoing, to your own undoing. Already you are being twisted. You revealed yourself to me just now, foolishly. Give it back to Smeagol, you said. Do not say that again. Do not let that thought grow in you. You will never get it back, but the desire of it may betray you to a bitter end. You will never get it back. In the last need, Smeagol, I should put on the precious, and the precious mastered you long ago. If I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire. And such would be my command. So have a care, Smeagol." Yeah. Of the random examples, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into a fire, to choose two really random examples of what I might possibly command you to do, or what might end up happening to you. Notice that Frodo is here in touch with, although Faramir is urging him later on, Frodo seems perfectly conscious of the same thing that Faramir is talking about in different words. Faramir is more blunt, right? Malice eats it like a canker, he says. But here, Frodo is saying, don't let that thought grow in you. You will never get it back. The desire of it may betray you to a bitter end. He recognizes, Faramir sees it a little bit more clearly. This is malice, right? It's not just desire. It is desire. But there's malice there too. It's not simply desire. Frodo is perhaps, I think Faramir implies, being slightly overkind in his assessment, though Frodo does perceive the same thing. But Frodo here is... This is one really significant thing about this passage is the threat that he makes at the end. If I, wearing it, were to command you... Wait a second. Remember the conversation he had with Galadriel in the Fellowship of the Ring, where he says, "Hey, Galadriel, I have a question. I've worn the Ring of Power. Why are not all the other rings revealed to me? Right? Why can't I?" And it's with this sort of implication of I've heard that this ring gives you enormous godlike powers of command. why does it just make me invisible? Why have I not ever experienced these powers? And she says, you haven't tried, right? Don't try. In order to do that, you would have to train your will to the domination of others. And she urges him that that's really not a good idea. But the implication is that he could do that. Now, I'm not suggesting that I think that Frodo could, in fact, become, the Dark Lord ruling the world if he were to claim the ring for his own, or that he actually, constitutes a threat to Sauron if he were to, when he claims it at the end, like that he could actually take Sauron down. I don't really think that's true, but he is. Tom, exactly as you're saying, the ring is twisting Frodo here. As I agree with you, Tom. That's exactly, I think, what we can see happening here. He is. It's not exactly, training his mind to the dominion of others, but it's the first step, right? He is contemplating putting on the ring and using it to command, to dominate others. I would put on the ring and I would command you to throw yourself off a cliff. That's pretty hardcore right there. That's, hey, would Gollum deserve it? Yes, but he and Gandalf already had that discussion. Twice, in a sense, right? You remember from last time. So this is, I think, a big deal in kind of seeing where Frodo is and the kind of thoughts that are already sort of starting to leak into Frodo's mind. There's some irony here. You are being twisted, he says to Gollum. And as Tom points out, he's being twisted too. Carissa asks, is he just posturing? We could read that as not actually hardcore, but just posturing. I guess what I'm tempted to say about that, Carissa, is I'm not sure that there's a huge difference in this particular scenario. I mean, it's like he's doing it, right? He's just stating, this is what I would do. The fact that plan is there, the fact that idea is there, is he really sincere? Does he mean it? Is he what? I mean, he's not joking. This is not very funny. So I don't think we could say that he doesn't mean it in that sense. Is he simply trying to intimidate? Is he bluffing? Is he just trying to intimidate Gollum? This doesn't sound like a bluff to me. I don't think so. We've never seen Frodo do that kind of thing, and I think especially that the dramatic irony involved. When we've read the book before, and we know that in fact he is going to leap from a precipice and cast himself into the fire. The Gollum, that is, gives this an air of solemnity. There's an element of prophecy in this, even if it's not intended, sort of conscious prophecy on Frodo's part. So I do think that his twisting here, the twisting of Frodo, is something that we can definitely see. Even his objections to Gollum's asking for the ring back. What are his motivations? Frodo's motivations for getting so stern, on that subject. I don't think it's simply benevolent. Yeah. Let's say, Sharon, very good point. Sharon says, I find it interesting that Frodo would cite at the last need, which is already a justification to use the ring for a powerful purpose. Yeah, exactly. There is an element of rationalization in there, isn't it? It's not that I'm planning to. It's not like I've actually worked it out and been like, okay, I'm going to start in some small ways building my career of the domination of other wills, right? It's time for me to start, getting some real mileage out of this baby, right? So I'm first Gollum, then the world, right? It's not like that, right? He's not doing any kind of conscious planning like that. At the last, in the last need, if worst came to worst, this is what I do, right? Okay. That's a slippery slope. Kay does point out, and it's a good point, Kay, that this is that does echo Gandalf's criteria not to strike without need. Pity and mercy, not to strike without need, thinking back to Gandalf's quotation. Yeah, but Kay, what I would say there is that's exactly where the rationalization comes from, right? Maybe he still has Gandalf's words in his head. We saw them in his head before, right? We know they're in his head. So maybe he's actually, in fact, playing off that, and that's where he's getting his rationalization from. That's anyway kind of what it sounds to me. Yeah. Tom has another good point. Says Sam's reaction to Frodo's words is interesting. Approval and surprise. And I think both sides of that are interesting. Approval, because Sam clearly believes that Frodo is being a bit of a pushover when it comes to Gollum. Sam feels like Frodo believes there's all this good or potential good in Gollum, and Sam believes that he sees right through him, right? And that he understands the situation better than Frodo. So he's surprised. And he approves of the sternness of his words. But I think the sort of potential greater significance of this, as far as Frodo's relationship with the ring, is going over Sam's head here. Yeah. Good. Okay, but look at me being efficient. Let's, speaking of Gandalf, go back and look at the passage that I said last time we'd eventually get to, and here, belatedly, we're getting to it. Frodo is deliberating. He's trying to decide what to do. And there's a long pause, longer than... that was actually something that I was noticing on my last read through here, was that I think I had never really paid attention to how long that delay is. When Gollum says, it's the only way, I'll show you this other way, we should go down that way. And Frodo is trying to decide, should he follow Gollum or should he go to the gate? And he ponders for a really long time. And he's pondering a bunch of different things. I mean, we see from that last speech to Gollum, he's pondering, is Gollum just attempting to deceive me? Is this treachery on Gollum's part? Answer, yes, this is treachery on Gollum's part. Or at least equivocation. I suspect that Gollum is in part even lying to himself. We saw, by the way, in his conversation, she might help, right? And Smeagol reacts in horror. No, not that way, not that way. And she, of course, is Shelob that he's referring to. So Stinker, Gollum, is already thinking, hey, maybe Shelob would help us, and we could do that. And Smeagol wants no part of it. When, therefore, he suggests his other way, it is one way of reading that would be Stinker has won, right? I'm not sure it's quite that simple. I think that he is kind of equivocating with himself. I think that he is, I think that he's thinking about, he's telling the truth and abiding by the letter of his oath. He is coming up with a solution which sort of pleases both sides, both the Smeagol and the Gollum sides. Smeagol is preserving the life of Frodo and does in fact know a route in, right, and is telling the truth about knowing this way and saying that he made it through there before, right? All of these things are true, but he knows that Shelob is there, and he knows that they're going to have to go through Shelob's lair. It is also treason. It is also treachery. But I think Gollum can kind of rationalize that. But anyway, during this debate, internal debate on Frodo's part, its name was Cirith Ungol, a name of dreadful rumour. Aragorn could perhaps have told them that name and its significance. Gandalf would have warned them. But they were alone, and Aragorn was far away, and Gandalf stood amid the ruin of Isengard and strove with Saruman, delayed by treason. Yet even as he spoke his last words to Saruman, and the Palantir crashed in fire upon the steps of Orthanc, his thought was ever upon Frodo and Samwise, over the long leagues his mind sought for them in hope and pity. It was in our discussion of pity that a couple of you, Brianna, I think you were, if I remember correctly, quoting this passage very, very correctly, as it's certainly very relevant. One thing that I would just point out, I think it's really fascinating here, this particular move on the part of the narrator. The narrator doesn't persistently do this, but the narrator is kind of in close, right? We're getting the conversation between Frodo and Sam and Gollum, and then Frodo is deliberating, and all of a sudden the narrator jumps back and tells us the stuff that they don't know, tells us the stuff that Frodo and Sam don't know, right? What Frodo is thinking about, dear audience, here's what Frodo doesn't know, right? Gives us a sort of an inside track in understanding the consequences of the decision that Frodo's about to make, which is an interesting, again, not a move that the narrator makes all the time. And I think under the circumstances, a very interesting one, especially since you sort of think, what's at stake? When Frodo is making that decision, what's at stake? It's not just a question of, can I trust Gollum? He's also thinking in bigger picture terms. Remember the way that he was talking way back at the beginning of chapter 1, right? That he feels that it's his doom to go to that shadow yonder, but will good or evil show it to me, right? He believes, he has that faith that we were talking about, that he's going to be able to get there. And so one of the things, again, it's not just about Gollum personally, what he's debating is, okay, hang on a second. I have a plain way in front of me, right? On the one hand, there's the gate to Mordor right there, right? I've been trying to get here. Here's the entrance into Mordor. I should go. It looks hopeless, but maybe I should have faith, right? Maybe I'm going to somehow get, that looks hopeless, but maybe I should have a crack at it, because anyway, maybe it's my doom, right? So I'll get through. That's one option, right? It's not throwing his life away. It's not just suicide. It could be, in the sense in which he was talking before, a step of faith. But then wait a second. Maybe I was talking about, will good or evil show it to me? Well, here's evil showing it to me, and he's just told me there's this other route. Should I go that way? Gosh, that sounds intuitive too, right? Maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Maybe that's how this is. Maybe that's where my doom is leading me. My doom brought me together with Gollum. It's made Gollum my guide, and now I'm supposed to follow Gollum. And he tells me there's this other way. So so instead of just braving this apparently hopeless entrance through the Black Gate, instead I will follow the guide that fate has brought to me. Well, that seems simpler, right? That's obviously the right answer. So what does the narrator do? By the way, the place where Gollum is taking them is a really bad place. Aragorn and Gandalf would have told them in a heartbeat, don't go there, don't go there. So, just in case we think that this actually is simple and straightforward, the narrator quashes that with this little aside. But at the same time, we get this juxtaposition with Gandalf, and I think that is a really fascinating juxtaposition. Alyssa, that's a great point. Alyssa points out that there's an irony here, right? Gandalf is delayed by treason, as it says. Alyssa points out Frodo is going to be sped by treason, right? He's going to be moved along by treason. He's in fact going to be shown the route, and his doom will ultimately be fulfilled by treason. So there is a kind of irony there. There's also, I think, on a simpler level, a really heavy hint, right? I mean, again, remember, the questions, okay, am I supposed to go there? Would going to this other place be a good idea? Answer, no, it's not a good idea. Is Gollum going to betray me? Yes, treason, Gollum is going to betray you, right? I mean, both of those things, the narrator is like holding up signs, treason, pointing down towards Gollum, bad idea, pointing over towards Cirith Ungol. So we get those things also, but at the same time, the end of Gandalf's conversation with Saruman also resonates with this scene in other ways too, I think. Remember, as I mentioned before, in sort of looking at the overall shape of the two towers and the number of times we get these important moments with major characters doing these doing these major decisions and are looking at the way in which they make them. Saruman, I pointed out, was one of those, right? Saruman is the one who makes the major decision at the end of Book 3, not to come down and help them, not to turn away even after his rebellion has failed and been proven hopeless. And here's, so we've got, to some extent, a parallel between Frodo and Gandalf and Saruman and Gollum. But there's also, in a sense, there's also a parallel between Frodo and Saruman. The two of them are the ones who are on the decision point. And as Frodo is teetering on the edge of his decision, Saruman has just made his. And Wormtongue has just thrown the Palantir. Yeah. Kay asks, would Aragorn and Gandalf have counseled him to go by the gate? He doesn't know what they would have counseled, and Gandalf and Aragorn themselves don't seem to have any idea. That's one of the interesting things about all this. And it's one of the things, I don't know, does that amount to an argument against the gate or for it? As Faramir says, there are no open ways into the Black Land. I mean, it's not like... if you're really clever, you'll find the easy route, and you're not gonna find the easy route. There is no easy route. Anyway, Sharon, good question, and we'll end with this on this passage. Sharon asks, what do I think is the purpose of the choice of Tolkien's that Gandalf sought for them in hope and pity? Pity being such an important concept. Yeah, good. I don't want to overlook that entirely. And both of them, hope and pity. Pity for them. I mean, he has pity for their suffering. He knows. And I think this also speaks to exactly, Kay, that dilemma that you were pointing to. It's not like they have any good options, right? With Frodo, it's not like, okay, just don't screw this up, Frodo, right? You've got the right choices and you've got the wrong choices. He's sitting here confronted by what seem on the surface like two obviously bad choices. Do I, A, attempt to go in through this obviously impregnable gate on my own with no resources, or B, do I follow this manifestly treacherous creature to some other place, which, oh, by the way, is right by Minas Morgul, which sounds like a really bad idea, and as Sam points out, is going to put us in as bad a fix as now or a worse one, right? So, this is a lose-lose scenario, seems to be a lose-lose scenario from Frodo's point of view. Sharon, that I think is why Gandalf, his mind reaches out to them in pity, because he knows Frodo is in that kind of a situation, or he's going to be confronting that kinds of situation, but also hope. It's not just pity. His mind sought for them in hope and pity. That I think is important. Anyway, let me move on here. One final thing before we get into our Faramir section, and that is, I want to take a second to clarify something, or just to bring up something which I don't know if it has ever tripped up any of you, but this is something that bothered me for like a couple years, every time I read this years ago. It's a passage from Faramir, when Faramir is talking about Isildur's Bane. It's Faramir's guess as to what Isildur's Bane is. And like I said, it may be that none of you have ever had, sort of asked this question or been confused by this, and maybe it's just me, but just in case, I wanted to talk about it. Now Faramir's voice sank to a whisper. But this much I learned, or guessed, and I have kept it ever secret in my heart since, that Isildur took somewhat from the hand of the unnamed, ere he went away from Gondor, never to be seen among mortal men again. Here, I thought, was the answer to Mithrandir's questioning. But it seemed then a matter that concerned only the seekers after ancient learning. Nor when the riddling words of our dream were debated among us did I think of Isildur's Bane as being this same thing. For Isildur was ambushed and slain by orc arrows according to the only legend that we knew, and Mithrandir never told me more. Okay, now here's the thing that always tripped me up about this passage. I was always confused by the combination of this passage and the revelation, when Sam slips and says he wanted the enemy's ring, and Faramir's like, so that is the answer to all the to all the riddles. And I would read this passage and I'm like, wait, didn't he figure it out? That Isildur took somewhat from the hand of the unnamed. Like, what is he going to take from his hand, right? I mean, I would read this and say he's making a veiled reference to the ring, right? He doesn't want to speak it openly, but he's just being, but he took somewhat from the hand of the unnamed, like a ring, like that must have, right? I mean, what else could it be? And so then, when he says it and he's like, that's what? The enemy's ring? I'm like, why is he acting surprised? Didn't he already know that? I don't know if any of you ever had this particular question when reading this passage, but as I said, it bothered me for years. I think that the key to this is that Ed says it could be a glove. He could have taken his glove. It is possible. Yeah, Diego, exactly. That's exactly the way that hand is metaphor. That he's using the word hand metaphorically. Doesn't mean literally took something off of his hand, concerning which presumably certainly there would be a limited number of options, right? But took something from the hand of the unnamed. That he's using that phrase from the hand generically here. That he has gathered, Faramir has gathered that some powerful thing of Sauron's, of which presumably he has more than one. The Ring of Power is presumably not Sauron's only, artifact. He was an artificer, we know. Even especially in the context of, you think about the legends of the Last Alliance, and the sword of Elendil and the spear of Gil-galad. There were some powerful artifacts at play there in that last battle. Many of the artifacts of Elendil and Isildur and everything are very significant. Certainly have been granted significance over. I mean, you've got the Elendil mirror that he wears on his brow and all these things. So the idea that Sauron would have more than one toy is quite plausible. And also the other thing to keep in mind, and this is always so hard for people to remember because the books are the Lord of the Rings, the discussion is on the rings and the Ring of Power from the beginning, so it's sort of like it's right in the forefront of our minds as we read it. We've got to remember, the War of the Last Alliance was 3,000 years ago. It was as far removed from the current time of the story of the Lord of the Rings as ancient Egypt is or like Mesopotamia is removed from our modern day. It was a long, long time ago, and nobody's been talking about the Rings of Power. The Rings of Power have been off the radar screen for thousands of years. Very few people even remember about the Rings of Power. This is why Elrond, in the Council of Elrond, has to go first and tell the whole backstory, because most people don't know it or don't know it clearly. And tell them, by the way, there were Rings of Power, and Sauron made one, and here's what happened. Because most people don't even know that. It's not even obvious to me that everybody involved in the Battle of the Last Alliance itself would have known about the Ring of Power. Because that was kind of an inside thing. Did all the Númenóreans who went into battle know that Sauron had a Ring of Power? That's not obvious to me that they would have known that. It wasn't public knowledge. So the idea that Faramir would have guessed that there was some artifact of power that Isildur took, that belonged to Sauron after his death, took from the body of Sauron, but yet also that Faramir would, knowing that, never have thought of the Ring of Rings, as he later says, actually does make a good deal more sense than I think it looks at first. And we can see that's in fact exactly where he goes in the rest of this passage. What in truth this thing is, I cannot yet guess, but some heirloom of power and peril it must be, a fell weapon, perchance, devised by the Dark Lord. And see, my problem when I was reading this passage is that I took from the hand literally and a fell weapon not figuratively. Like the ring is a weapon, to be used in our hands, like Boromir might talk about it. When I think Faramir is doing exactly the opposite. He's using from the hand figuratively, and he's using a fell weapon literally. Like the Morgul knife, right? We get lots of examples of fell weapons. So maybe what Faramir seems to be guessing, maybe when he overcame Sauron had some weapon, a sword, a mace, a dagger, or something, which was really powerful, and he's like, I shall keep this, and I will use this for good. Maybe that's that was Faramir's theory, and it's not. It's a totally plausible theory. Anyway, like I said, this, you guys are probably all laughing at me and never thought about that and think that I'm quite silly for having had that particular uncertainty myself. But just in case anyone else was in that position, I just wanted to mention that. Okay. The window on the west. I've said it before. The window on the west is my favorite chapter title in the whole Lord of the Rings. The way that chapter title works on several different levels is really, really cool. I think it's the most brilliant chapter title in the whole book. And here is the actual description of it. They stood on a wet floor of polished stone, the doorstep, as it were, of a rough-hewn gate of rock opening dark behind them. But in front, a thin veil of water was hung, so near that Frodo could have put an outstretched arm into it. It faced westward. The level shafts of the setting sun beat behind it, and the red light was broken into many flickering beams of ever-changing color. It was as if they stood at the window of some elven tower, curtained with threaded jewels of silver and gold and ruby, sapphire and amethyst, all kindled with an unconsuming fire. This is a beautiful description, but I wanted to point this out for a couple reasons. One is there is a persistent use of metaphor in this section, I think, that really becomes a significant pattern in these chapters that are under discussion for today. And here's what I mean by that. It's not that when I say that he's using metaphors here, I don't mean that he's like there's some kind of other ulterior meaning that he's pointing to, some kind of contemporary meaning or something like that. But rather, this passage of the Two Towers is our first prolonged encounter with the sort of touching on the outskirts of Numenor. Remember how I was talking earlier about the poem that Aragorn recites and sort of the narrative positioning of that poem, the way that when they arrive in Meduseld, they are really kind of crossing the threshold. The story is kind of crossing that threshold and entering into the world of men. We get glimpses of Numenor. We get the Argonath, right? We get Amon Hen. We've had encounters with Numenor. Aragorn has seen Gondor from a distance and recited a poem to it, right? But we haven't really spent any time there. And right afterwards, Frodo turns to the side and is in, the Emyn and the Dead Marshes and the Black Gate, back away, into Sauron's country. But when they enter Ithilien, we've now crossed another threshold. Now they're really entering into the realm that was Gondor's, the realm that was one of the Númenórean realms in exile. And I think that that's a really important moment in this story. And in that moment, in that first encounter that we get, not first encounter, that was the Argonath, but this first experience, this first prolonged experience that we have within the confines of the Númenórean realms, Tolkien seems to persistently use some sort of metaphorical moments to draw our attention to this, to invite us to recognize the significance of the Númenórean realms in exile, of what they are coming in contact with and how it's different from the Rohirrim. We looked at who shall gather the smoke from the dead wood burning, and I was talking about the sort of the potential applicability of that not only to the fading and mortality of the human realms, but even also to their glory, in looking at the Helm's Deep sequence as we did before. Numenor is different. It works differently. It has a different significance, and Tolkien invests it with a different significance. And how that happens is by these encounters. This, not just the encounter with Faramir, which is of course the center of it, but the way that he sort of surrounds the encounter with Faramir, with these other things that kind of give us hints as to what we're looking at and the kind of encounter that we're having. This is one of the two that I'd like to draw our attention to. The window on the west, which is, so this is the window of the sunset, Henneth Anun. It's where we get the title of the chapter from, so certainly we should be paying attention to it. It faced westward. Look at the way in which this description of the beautiful sunset shining through the waterfall, the kinds of things he's inviting us to associate with this. First of all, it's facing westward. And in case we have missed the significance of facing westward, we're reminded of it in the pre-dinner ritual that Faramir observes right before dinner, that they face west, towards Numenor that was, Elvenhome that is, and that which is beyond and shall ever be. We are reminded of the significance of the West in the tradition of Middle-earth. That tradition of which is not remembered, not observed by everybody. Frodo feels rustic and untutored because hobbits are rustic and untutored about these things, not Numenorians, right? The Numenorians, this is what Numenor always was. The Numenorians are mortals. They're connected to the mortal world, but they are also elevated beyond the mortal world. Numenor itself was an island in the middle, right? Halfway, almost halfway, to Valinor, but still on the mortal side. It was less than halfway, just less than halfway to Valinor. But it was in this in-between place, in between the mortal lands and the undying lands. Numenor was always a bridge between those two things, and we can still see it functioning in that way. It's when he's encountering these, later Numenorian soldiers that he is introduced, that he's reminded of the West and invited to look to the West in that way. And so anyway, so we've got so naturally the window from their hideout looks westward, like the rest of their society. At least the good parts of it are looking westward. But what is shining on the westward facing window? The setting sun. It's going down, right? Numenor has passed, is almost past, right? We are at the sunset of the Numenorian realm. There's, of course, Aragorn is going to become king, and there will be a sort of a second flowering, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still sunset, a glorious sunset, right? But Aragorn's whole reign and his line after him are still the glorious sunset of the realm of Numenor in Middle-earth. So anyway, so that's another way in which we could sort of see the metaphorical significance. But then notice the other thing, the beauty of it. It was as if they stood at the window of some elven tower. Maybe like, for instance, the elven tower that you could see from Numenor, right? I'm beating a dead horse here. But again, this actually reminds me of the description of meeting Goldberry, if you recall that in the Fellowship of the Ring. Like knocking at the door of a cottage and being met by a fair young elf queen clad in living flowers. They stood at the window of some elven tower, curtained with threaded jewels of silver and gold and ruby, sapphire and amethyst, all kindled with an unconsuming fire. You have both the splendor of elven realms, but also their craftsmanship and their magic, the idea of these gems kindled with an unconsuming fire, for which of course there is precedent in the Silmarils, of course. But again, that element of elven power, of elven magic, is also associated here with with the Númenóreans. There is a likeness there. There is a connection there, which is not there, in Rohan, for instance. Even with Helm and Helm's Deep and Helm for Theoden King, that there's still it's not the same. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same impact. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, Tom makes a good point. Ithilien is the first forest or woods that anyone enters that has nothing to do with elves or mythic creatures. I guess, Tom, if you don't count Oliphants, right? He doesn't live there. It's connected with men, and as high and beautiful as it isn't fairy. Mortal, as you just said, and as death encountered here underlies, right, the bones that Sam finds. Yeah. But it's still, to misapply a phrase, it still smells like elves, though. It's not elvish. And you'll notice when Legolas gets there, he's like, oh, this place is nice, right? He feels comfortable in Ithilien. He really admires Ithilien. But you're right, Tom. I mean, I don't want to understress your point, Tom, which I think is a very good one. It is significant that this is not an elvish realm. It's a mortal realm. It's a human realm. But again, it's not in fairy, but it's like a suburb of fairy, or at least there are these fairy elements to it. And that's one of the things that I think is so fascinating about that Elven Tower window description of Henneth Anun there. It looks out to the west in the blaze of the setting sun, reminding us of Númenor, but it's also recalling elven power and elven magic. Jenny makes a wonderful point. The sunset is what makes the waterfall colorful, though. It wouldn't have been so pretty at noon. Great point, Jenny. It is. It's the splendor of Númenor even in its decline. And that, I think, is what is so significant about Faramir as a character. Gondor is in decline. He talks about Gondor in decline. We see Gondor in decline. Denethor. Boromir has already given us a hint at Gondor in decline, as Faramir openly sort of acknowledges, essentially. Denethor will show it us again, even more. In Faramir, we see, to me, I say that window on the west, Faramir is, to me, in himself, the window on the west. He is a glimpse of Númenor and what Númenor was like and what Númenóreans were like. He is the level shafts of the setting sun beating upon that window. It is sort of the glory of Faramir is like that glory of the setting sun. But Jenny, you make a wonderful point. At noon, the waterfall wouldn't be as pretty, right? It is seeing not just the fading. It's not dusk. It's sunset. And the sunset is glorious, and the sunset is beautiful, even in its decline. It is beautiful. It is powerful. Here's the other passage that I wanted to point to, which I think also works in a metaphorical way. About the road. The road had been made in a long-lost time, and for perhaps 30 miles below the Morannon it had been newly repaired, but as it went south, the wild encroached upon it. The handiwork of men of old could still be seen in its straight, sure flight and level course. Now and again it cut its way through hillside slopes, or leaped over a stream upon a wide, shapely arch of enduring masonry. But at last all signs of stonework faded, save for a broken pillar here and there, peering out of bushes at the side, or old paving stones, still lurking amid weeds and moss. Heather and trees and bracken scrambled down and overhung the banks, or sprawled out over the surface. It dwindled at last to a country cart road little used, but it did not wind. It held on its own sure course, and guided them by the swiftest way. the road here, I think, also serves metaphorically. It's not that the description of the road as they travel southward is itself like a linear metaphor for the history of Gondor. I wouldn't go so far that, like, as we see the road fall into disrepair, we are seeing, sort of the decay of Gondor and the decline of Gondor. I don't think so, mostly because where it starts is not anything like the history of Numenor, because it's for 30 miles below the Moran, and it had been newly repaired. The implication, of course, is that it's been newly repaired by Sauron and his minions. And that's not where Numenor starts. Sauron had a big part in Numenor, but that's not where it begins exactly. So I don't think that, or at least I think that it's a clumsy, that's it can only be clumsily applied, I think, to the history of Gondor in any kind of straightforward fashion. But the way in which it is, taking this passage and you sort of put this passage next to Faramir's narration, his story of the decline of Gondor, and how they fell out of wisdom, how they've become middlemen, but with memory of other things. That the idea of this great highway of Gondor dwindling at last to a country cart road little used, is, to me, that right there is, I think, a really powerful metaphor. It's still a road. It's not very much used. And it has become small, and it has become narrow, and people don't even go there much anymore. But it's still true. It doesn't wind. It held on its own sure course and guided them by the swiftest way. It is still a road laid by the men of Numenor. Good. Oh, by the way, and correction, of course, thank you, Alyssa, for, as so often, catching my slips. Alyssa is one of our students at Mythgard, and is frequently my fact checker. Of course, you're right, Alyssa. I was misremembering that passage about the positioning of Numenor. It's not on the Middle-earth side, it's on the Valinor side. It's not 40% of the way to Valinor, it's 60% of the way to Valinor. So yes, thank you for catching that slip on my part. It's still, again, the significance of its positioning between the mortal realms and the Undying Lands is still really crucial. But it's a testimony to the significance, of the sort of the gift that was given in the Land of Gift to the Numenorians, that they're put just over the halfway mark. Thanks for catching that. Kay, it's a good way of thinking about it. Kay says it works as a metaphor for legends from the old days, thinking back to the discussions with Theoden, I think. They're a remnant and a memory, but they contain the truth. It is unwise to scoff at myth and legend. It may be neglected, it may be used by few people and only apparently, rustics. But it doesn't wind. Its course is still sure, and it will still guide you by the swiftest way. I think that there are a couple ways in which we can see this sort of functioning metaphorically. The reason I think that Tolkien is doing this, as I said, I think that he wants to introduce Gondor, because again, this is our first real encounter with Gondor, modern Gondor, not just the relics. And he wants us to see both sides of that, to appreciate the decay of Gondor, not to be thinking this is, the mighty land of the Númenóreans, but we can't lose sight of it. It is very distinct from the Rohirrim. The difference in the culture between Rohan and Gondor is, I think, not only a really important element in the story, but really fascinating the way that Tolkien conveys that, and the different things that he has us associate with those two different cultures, who are, near neighbors and allies, and, it would be easy enough for us to kind of lump them together. Okay, we've got two neighboring allied human kingdoms who are both, good guys working together, but he accomplishes two very different things with those two different groups. And I think I think that we can see in this section some of the ways in which he's pushing us to think about Gondor and the Númenóreans. By the way, one small side note there. It's one of in the films. I just want to kind of give a shout out to something I think visually they did really, really well in the films. Thinking about this kind of metaphorical thing, they did one in the film, which I think also is really cool. You remember when, at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring film, when they're in the general Amon Hen region, so they're in that, places where the old kingdom of Gondor used to be, and Frodo is out collecting wood right when Boromir finds him and tries to take the ring from him, and he walks past that like half-submerged statue head, right? So you see this old colossal statue's head now fallen down and half buried in the ground, as it's obviously been lying there for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's it's in some ways it's kind of hokey, but I really like it, actually. I think that one image of Frodo gathering dead wood in his arms, or Boromir, sorry, is the one gathering firewood, not Frodo. I'm making slips all over the place tonight. Boromir is gathering firewood. So Boromir, with his arms full of dead wood, coming upon, this obviously Númenórean statue, because it looks, it's obviously cut in the same style as the Argonath was, but it's old, it's broken and it's fallen and it's neglected, but it's not forgotten. You can still see it, and it's still there, and it's only half submerged, and one eye is still looking out at them. Anyway, so that's a moment from the film which I think has a similar kind of impact to these passages. Good. Well, let's look at Faramir. In the films, of course, we can't have Faramir be sufficiently noble, right? No, we can't. This passage is exactly the problem, right? This is what Peter Jackson and Philippa Boyens had no patience with when making the film character of Faramir. And this is the thing that so many Tolkien fans have had such a hard time forgiving them for. But fear no more. I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. Not where Minas Tirith falling in ruin, and I alone could save her so, using the weapon of the Dark Lord for her good and my glory. No, I do not wish for such triumphs, Frodo, son of Drogo. This follows right from that passage that I was quoting before about thinking that Isildur's Bane might be this fell weapon of some kind that he took from Sauron. I wouldn't want it, says Faramir. I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. One brief thing I would point out about that, he later quotes himself here and says, I said not if it lay by the highway would I take it. And he says, basically, I would take that, I would have taken that as an oath and have considered myself bound by it. Even if I really did want to take the ring, Faramir passes the test. Right? Faramir passes the test better than Galadriel does, obviously better than Boromir did. He passes the test of the ring, of the lure of the ring with flying colors. But I think it's an important thing. He does like an anti-rationalization. That statement, I would not take this thing if it lay by the highway. That's not a vow. That's not an oath. It's a statement of his intention. If I found it lying by the highway, I wouldn't take it. If you're trying to rationalize your way around that one, I mean, you could drive a truck through the holes in that statement, taken as a vow, right? That would be the easiest vow ever to get out of. But he goes the other way with it, right? Again, it's like anti-rationalization. That thing that I said about kind of my vague general intentions of never wanting to have it, no, I would retroactively make that into a vow never to take it under any circumstances. It's like the mirror reverse of the kind of rationalization that we so often see people doing about the ring. Diego is thinking of oaths again. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it does come in here again. But see, Diego, the interesting thing is it's like the opposite. Smeagol is compelled by Frodo to make an oath, right? It's the only way that he'll take him with him. And that oath is binding upon him, and it's the power of the ring. The precious will hold him to the promise. It's the power of the ring by which he has sworn that binds him to his oath. Faramir binds himself to what sounds to me, maybe I'm an amateur on oath-taking, but that sounds to me like a completely non-binding statement on Faramir's part. But he is bound not by anything external, but by purely internal things. Sharon is abjuring me in all caps not to mention the film Faramir. I have to, Sharon. Just have to go there. I have to. And one of the reasons... take this comfort in the travesty of the film Faramir. He makes the book Faramir look even awesomer than he already did. Anyway, let me carry on here. Neither did the council, said Frodo, nor do I. I would have nothing to do with such matters. For myself, said Faramir, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of the kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace, Minas Anor again as of old, full of light, high and fair, beautiful as a queen among other queens, not as a mistress of many slaves, nay, not even as a kind mistress of willing slaves. War must be, while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend, the city of the men of Númenor, and I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom, not feared, save as men may fear the dignity of a man old and wise. This is, I've called it the ring defying monologue, again playing on my own silly turn of phrase that I've used many times before, of the ring-induced monologue that people will so often do when they're experiencing the temptation of the ring. This is the absolute opposite of all of the ring-induced monologues. The ring induces people to rationalize seizing power. It tempts people to subordinate the means to the ends, and to take power for themselves and dominate others for their own good, dominate others for the in the interest of the greater good or whatever. Faramir accompanies his retroactive oath here in that first paragraph with a paragraph which explains where his own heart lies, and it lies in the absolute opposite direction. Notice, it's easy to miss. In that first sentence, I would see the white tree in flower again in the courts of kings, and the silver crown return, and Minas Tirith in peace. It's easy to see that as nostalgia, right? I would see the glory of Gondor restored, and to miss the humility in that statement. I am the son, now heir, sadly, of the ruling steward. I would see the king's return. Boromir, as a kid, is like, Dad, come on, why aren't you king already? This is lame, right? Faramir longs for the return of the king, wants to see that restored, even though it means that he would be put out of power. It is not only a statement full of nostalgia for the glory of Gondor, but it is a very humble statement, exactly again in the opposite direction. Take that paragraph and put it next to Boromir's rationalization paragraph, where he, it would be mad not to use it, to use the ring against the enemy, and his thought about preserving his city and becoming a king, benevolent and wise. Put those two things next to each other, and you can see Faramir is facing 180 degrees in the opposite direction of Boromir, and it's his humility that is really striking. And of course, I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. Again, that's himself that he's talking about here. It's humility. He is the greatest captain. Boromir was a greater captain, but after Boromir, he is the greatest captain of war that Gondor has. he is the one now winning more glory as a warrior than anyone else. He just won a battle like an hour ago before he said this, right? So yeah, how he describes Minas Tirith again, exactly, very different from that, the king benevolent and wise, and the way that he characterizes both himself and the city that Boromir is thinking of. Think about how quick Boromir was to jump in, right? He jumps in the Council of Elrond. Allow me to say a word about Gondor, right? For verily from that, think not that in Gondor the blood of Númenor is wholly spent, nor all of its pride and dignity forgotten, he says. He's quick to defend it. No. Gondor is still awesome, right? It's still, and I think also of that stinging slap that Aragorn gives to him. Lore wanes in Gondor, Boromir, if in the city where men were once considered wise, they now speak evil of Lothlorien. But again, he's clearly using that language because he knows that it will sting Boromir. Because he is emphatically making the point to Boromir that he is wrong, and it does not befit somebody of Gondor to speak that way of Lothlorien. But again, it's because of Boromir's own pride, his own personal pride, and his pride for his city. The relationship that Faramir has is completely different. This is not the moment where Faramir turns away from the ring. This is where Faramir shows us why he is inoculated against the temptation of the ring. This is why... I was about to say why he's immune. It's not exactly immunity, of course, but this is the strength that Faramir has, the particular kind of strength that Faramir has that makes him well nigh impervious to the temptation of the ring. Good. One more. This is, of course, the actual moment of his rejection of the ring. Sam has just said, "It's now's a chance for you to show your quality." "So it seems," said Faramir, slowly and very softly, with a strange smile. "So that is the answer to all the riddles. The one ring that was thought to have perished from the world. And Boromir tried to take it by force, and you escaped, and ran all the way to me. And here in the wild I have you, 2 halflings and a host of men at my call, and the ring of rings. A pretty stroke of fortune, a chance for Faramir, captain of Gondor, to show his quality. Ha!" He stood up, very tall and stern, his grey eyes glinting. Frodo and Sam sprang from their stools and set themselves side by side with their backs to the wall, fumbling for their sword hilts. There was a silence. All the men in the cave stopped talking and looked towards them in wonder. But Faramir sat down again in his chair and began to laugh quietly, and then suddenly became grave again. "Alas for Boromir, it was too sore a trial," he said. Now, tell me, what just happened here? Can you gloss this passage for me? Let me ask a few questions. Question number 1. Is Faramir tempted? Are we seeing him overcome temptation? He stood up very tall and stern, his grey eyes glinting. Does Faramir have a notion at that moment? Is he like, I think I'm gonna... No, I'm good. Is that what happened there? Was he tempted? And to what extent is he tempted? That's my first question. My second question. Why does he laugh? What's he laughing about? Why he becomes grave again seems clear enough by what he says. Alas for Boromir, it was too sore a trial. Right? What overcoming this temptation, if whatever temptation he experiences, what this revelation makes him realize is now he understands fully what happened with Boromir. But why does he laugh? And why does he stand up? What's going on here? Sharon is pointing out Faramir's grey eyes. One small gloss I'd give on that phrase, Sharon. That's a very medieval phrase. The eye color that modern people call blue was called gray in the Middle Ages. Almost always. They didn't. Blue is not an eye color in the Middle Ages. It's gray and brown. So, just, I mean, that's a very common description. Someone whom we would call a blue-eyed blonde was always a gray-eyed blonde. Fair-haired beauties in medieval love poems always have gray eyes. I think of a comical line from Chaucer where he's describing a gray-eyed beauty and says that her eyes were as gray as a goose. Anyway, so his eyes are gray, which we would call blue. Okay. So what's happening? Is he tempted? Diego thinks maybe, like Galadriel, but in a smaller scale. Maybe. Alyssa points out, as he explains afterwards, when Sam says, you took the chance and showed your quality, right? The very highest. Faramir, of course, he's very humble, right? So he doesn't say, yeah, I was pretty awesome back there, wasn't I? I mean, I just totally rejected the ring like it was nothing back there, right? Of course, Faramir doesn't say that, but what he says is, I had no lure or desire to do other than I have done. He says, I wasn't tempted, right? It's not the ring, not tempting. I don't want the ring. Now, so of course, we could choose to doubt him, right? Maybe that might be easier said now than it was a few minutes before. Carolyn, excellent. We do have another candidate here, don't we? If Faramir in fact has no lure or desire, if he feels no temptation to take the ring, that puts him in pretty rare company. If Boromir has conquered because he overcame that temptation and turned away from it, that puts him in relatively elite company, right? Bilbo is the only one who's ever actually left the ring behind and abandoned it knowingly and on purpose and lived afterwards. But as Carolyn points out, the only other person that we know of who was not tempted at all by the ring is Tom Bombadil. Gandalf is tempted, right? Gandalf explains, talks about things like the path that the ring has to his mind, like, he dares not take it. Gandalf is tempted. He knows that he might try to use it to see if he could turn it to good and that it would ensnare him. Galadriel is tempted. Again, I think that moment, as I said before, I think her speech, her in place of the Dark Lord, you would have a queen speech, is a little bit less dramatic than people will often make it. That is not, I think, her in the process of rationalization. It's her explanation, her demonstration, rather, to Frodo of why she is saying no, why she has resisted that temptation. But anyway, Jenny asks a good question. If he's not tempted, I don't see how he would suddenly understand about Boromir. Well, Jenny, I think in one way we could understand that simply as he knows his brother, right? And he can sit there and say, I don't want the ring. Oh, dang, but Boromir would, right? I mean, he loves his brother, but he knows him, as he says. So I think that we could see that. Kay also does point out, of course, Tom Bombadil does laugh about the ring also. That's another thing that Faramir would seem to have in common with him. Yeah. Yeah, good. And Anne-Marie says he was tempted, but he was wise enough to know that there were some perils a man must flee. Yes, Yes, though. Though we don't see him running away exactly. I'm not sure that we see him fleeing here. Emily points out that if he is a pupil of Gandalf, he seems to be exceeding his teacher here. And certainly, the fact of Gandalf being his teacher, I mean, Gandalf's own humility is a really important and very prominent feature. So we do see Gandalf as being Faramir's teacher in some ways. If we would point to ways in which Gandalf has influenced him, I think that we can see some of these things that that he's been saying, that we were looking at in the previous passages, seem to be Gandalf influenced. But why does he laugh? Why does he laugh? And if he's not tempted, why does he stand up very tall and stern with his grey eyes glinting? Why does he say, "Ha!" at the end of his speech? Why does he say, "And here in the wild I have you, 2 halflings and a host of men at my call, and the ring of rings"? He seems to be leading them to think. If he's not actually contemplating taking the ring from them, he certainly seems to invite them to think that. What do you think? Sharon says, Faramir laughs because he knows the truth about himself is so different from what Frodo expects. So he's just messing with him? He's just like screwing with him? Right? "I'm going to make you think I'm about to take the ring. Oh, not taking the ring. Made you look." Right? And then he's going to laugh at their expense. "Suckers. You totally thought I was going for the ring just there. I just played you big time, you suckers." Right? That's what Faramir... It seems a little... What do you think? It seems a little harsh. Tom says, isn't Faramir laughing because he's now being confronted with the necessity of living up to his boast? That he sees the irony, right? I said I wouldn't take it, and now I said I wouldn't take it, whatever it was, Isildur's Bane, and now I find out that it's the Ring of Power. Oh, and now I'm stuck. Gosh, oh, the irony, right? Boromir tried to take it away, and now you brought it to me, and I can't take it. Hilarious. Right? To some extent. Brianna says, when Faramir stands up, I got the impression that he is facing east, since it feels like he's facing away from the window. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I always imagined him facing the side of the cave, but perhaps. Jenny, that seems very plausible to me. Jenny says, it's funny maybe that if Faramir had gone to Rivendell instead, Frodo might have met Boromir here, and things might have been different. That's very interesting, Jenny. The second half of that is not something I've thought about very much. The first half I've thought about a great deal. Not only is there, if Faramir had gone, it seems, I think, relatively clear that Faramir was supposed to go. If the dream is a summons, it's Faramir who's being summoned. Remember Boromir's account. The dream was Faramir's dream. It came to Faramir many, many times once it came to Boromir too. When Faramir asks to go, to follow the instruction of the dream, he feels like he's being called to Rivendell, and he wants to go. And Boromir claims the errand, because he's the eldest, and he's more hardy than Faramir. Right? I have better right, and I am more qualified than you, Faramir. I should go instead, because I'm awesomer than you are. And Faramir concedes, yes, you are awesomer. That's right. And Denethor gives the quest to him to go to Rivendell. It clearly was Faramir's job to go to Rivendell, but Jenny, you're right. They probably would have met Boromir in Ithilien had Faramir been along with them. Yeah. Sharon thinks that he's not laughing at their expense. The humor is in the unexpected, the contrast between what Frodo thinks of Faramir and what Faramir knows of himself is humorous. Yeah, I mean, I do think that he sees the irony in the whole situation. And And I think he is. It seems like he is playing up to it there. And Boromir tried to take it by force, and you escaped and ran all the way to me. And here in the wild I have you. Remember that Strider does a very similar thing in Bree. Remember when he pulls that stern face and says, if I were after the ring, I could have it now. And he pulls back his cloak and shows his sword hilt, and the hobbits again freak out, and then he's like, but I am the real Aragorn, fortunately. Or the real Strider, fortunately. He does a similar thing to what Faramir does here. Faramir does seem to, on purpose, lead them to believe that he's going to take it. And he's quoting back to Sam's own words, right? Oh, the irony. You think this is a chance for me to show my quality, right? Yes, I will show my quality in a new way. I shall make myself Lord. That shall be my new quality. And again, playing on that word, because of course the word quality means not only how good you are, but your quality means also, your rank in society. I just promoted, what is my quality? Promoted from steward to king. That's what my quality is, right? And he begins to laugh quietly at the irony of this. That's not, no, guys, I'm just kidding. That's not really what's happening here, though it looks like it, right? He appreciates the irony of the situation. Yeah. Diego says, I think it was a eucatastrophe that Boromir went to the council and now Faramir faced the ring temptation. Diego, it does work out that way. In the end, it was not how it was supposed to be. It was not what was, in that sense, I think, supposed to happen. But, in the end, it worked out for the best. And that's what so often happens in The Lord of the Rings, that things which seem to be wrong, things which seem to be a misfortune, in fact, turn out to be not only good, but uniquely beneficial. Oh, Sharon, you weren't right. I am sorry. Sharon is pointing out that there's another Sharon here. Yeah, I was just quoting Sharon Powell before. I didn't realize that. Yes, a couple times. Sorry, Sharon Powell. I'm used to interacting with Sharon Hoff, and thanks, Sharon, for pointing that out. I didn't notice that. Anyway. Alyssa says, he could be trying their resolution to see how they will react in the face of apparently greater power trying to take it. Good, and she's remembering Boromir's words, you can say that I took it by force, for I am too strong for you. Boromir kind of works himself up to actually seizing the ring by citing a hypothetical situation, right? But he is also permitting Frodo an out, right? Frodo, if you want to get rid of it, why not be rid of it? He tells him, right? If you would, I could believe that you want to get rid of it. I know you're scared. Say I took it by force, right? And then, of course, he moves from the theoretical rationalization to the actualization of it. But Faramir, you could say, of course, does not take that step. That he is... she says there's irony in tempting Frodo backwards to give it up, where Boromir was tempted to seize it. In fact, really, Boromir was tempting him to the same thing, but not in order to test him. And Boromir wasn't interested in testing Frodo, right? He was rationalizing, whereas arguably Frodo could be seen as testing them in this way. Emily says maybe he's in semi-shock. The ring is actually here, and that he's still kind of processing this. In some way, Emily, I think that I can see that, and and Boromir tried to take it by force, and you escaped and ran all the way to me, and here in the wild I have you. I think that's not just premeditation, like premeditated messing with them or testing them. Thinking of it in that way, Emily, as a kind of processing, right? Like he's like, now everything is clicking together. Now I see what's happening here. Now I see that there was more than chance in our meeting. Now I recognize this, but like, oh, the irony of you coming from Boromir to me and seeing the parallel situations and knowing how much harder this would be for Boromir, knowing him as he does. Yeah. Good. Well, I should let you go. I've been keeping you guys late here tonight again. Though at least I did get through all my passages. Faramir's character, I certainly don't think Faramir is being malicious here, nor do I certainly think he's laughing in mockery. I think also, in a sense, the laughter is designed partly for his men, of course. The men in the cave stopped talking and looked towards them in wonder. The fact that he sits down and laughs is also a cue to the men, who the narrator tells us see that the captain has had some jest or other with the little guests. So he's diffusing the situation. If Emily, he is sort of shocked into standing up and making this rather intense declaration and sort of working through these things and seeing all the implications, and they clearly are thinking that he's about to turn on them, and he doesn't want to have to turn around and be like, it's okay, everybody, ring of power, I resisted, go about your business, right? Like he doesn't want to do that, right? So you could see his laughter as a way to diffuse the situation for the benefit of his men, but I also think it's for the benefit of Frodo and Sam, right? That he's trying to reassure them and to show them, no, it's okay. Like I'm not. I've not gone there really. Sharon Hoff still thinks that it's his own reflection on his relationship with his brother. I think in a sense, good. No, I think all of those things make sense to me. And I do, something that a bunch of you have mentioned is irony. I do think that the irony of all of this comes in on him here. And there's so many different things that are ironic. The fact that he forswore this thing before he knew what it was, but even now that he does know what it was, he wouldn't really want it, yet it would seem like he would want it, and they are probably going to be terrified that he does want it, and Boromir certainly did, and now, and they, having just escaped from Boromir, now they've come against his brother, and boy, that must seem like bad luck, like, poor little Frodo, like, I'm being persecuted by this family, right? How many brothers do I have to escape? All of these, there's so many different ways in which he sort of is hit by all of the different ironies of that situation. So I think his laughter, therefore, is can also be seen as a link to all that stuff. As sort of an expression of all of those complicated things. Anyway, I will let you go. A brief announcement, though, before I do. I wanted to let you guys know that, as you may have seen already, the Mythgard Institute students are throwing a sort of an old-fashioned telethon. Well, it's a webathon, so it's not all that old-fashioned. On Sunday, Hobbit Day, the 22nd, as it is our final pledge drive for the Indiegogo funding campaign for the Mythgard Academy. We want to try to raise some more funds to have some, to have these classes go on. I would love to see a full year of these classes to be able to do a lot of things together as we've been going through the Two Towers together. So I would definitely encourage you. I know there are going to be... I've not been planning this, so I don't yet know everything that's going to be happening. I've heard about some of the segments that are going to be happening that should be really cool. There'll be a lot of fun things to watch and to participate in. There will also be a bunch of sort of special opportunities and extra perks and incentives for giving. I know there have been some additional donations and prizes that are going to be given away on that day. So it should be. It should be a lot of fun. From what I've heard, I think it's going to be great fun, and I'm looking forward to it. Yes, Trish is reminding me that I should mention one segment that I am going to be taking part in live is Mythgard Fantasy Theater 3000. Trish and Dave and I are going to be doing some MST3K style commentary tracks on Tolkien films, so that should be fun. But anyway, so I hope that you guys can tune in. Go to the mythgard.org website. You can find the page for the telethon. You can find out some more information there and stay posted to announcements as we go. So just keep that in mind to be checking in on our telethon on Sunday, next Sunday, the 22nd. So. Anyway, but thanks again for joining us, everybody. Next week, both days, Monday, Thursday, normal schedule as we had in the previous 2 weeks, and not the strange, bizarre last-minute switches I had to do here with this second session. Back to Monday evening, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and Thursday afternoon, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, for our final two classes in the Two Towers class. We'll get through the end of the book next week. So anyway, thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and good night. Bye.